Chapter 12. Written in the Stars. The cupolas quiver with light in the dazzling sunshine. The bathers fill the air with the sounds of their matinal ablution, and the jumbled oriental pageant of the waterfront of Benares shows itself anew to my alien gaze. I idle down the Ganges in a heavy junk whose prow is carved like a cobra's head. I sit on the roof of a cabin, while the 3 rowers who are below pull their quaint oars. A merchant from Bombay is my companion, and as he sits next to me, he tells me that he intends to retire from trade when he returns to that city. He is an extremely pious, but equally practical man. While laying up treasure in heaven, he has not omitted to lay up treasure in the bank. I have known him for about a week, and find him an amiable, genial, and friendly person. I am retiring at the very age which Sudai Babu predicted it would happen, he says, eager to explain. This odd remark causes me metaphorically to prick up my ears. Sudhi Babu? Who is he? Do you not know he is the cleverest astrologer in Benares? Oh, just an astrologer. I grunt back a little scornfully, for I have seen the breed squatting in the dust of Bombay's great open space, the maiden sitting in sultry booths at Calcutta, and foregathering wherever travelers pass through every little town I have visited. Most of them are dirty-looking creatures with wild locks of unkempt hair. The recognizable print of superstition and ignorance rests upon their faces. Their stock in trade usually consists of 2 or 3 greasy, well-fingered books and some vernacular almanac filled with incomprehensible signs. I have often cynically thought of their eagerness to direct the fortunes of other persons, when they themselves seemed outside the pale of good fortune. I am somewhat surprised at you. Is it safe for a businessman to trust himself to the twinkling of the stars? Don't you think common sense is a better guide? I add in the tone of one giving good advice. The other man half shakes his head and smiles tolerantly at me. How then do you explain the prediction of my retirement? Who could have guessed that I would give up trade at such an exceptionally early age? For as you know, I am only a year past 40. Coincidence, perhaps? Very well, let me tell you a little story. Some years ago, I met a great astrologer in Lahore and started a large business negotiation on his advice. At that time, I was in partnership with an older man. My partner asserted that the affair was far too risky, and he refused to agree with me. Because he would not enter into the transaction, we dissolved partnership. I carried the business through alone. It was a startling success and brought me a small fortune. Yet, unless the Lahore astrologer had strongly supported me, I too would have feared to enter into the affair. Then you hold the opinion that my companion finishes the sentence for me. Our lives are ruled by destiny, and that destiny is shown by the position of the stars. I slip my objections to his statement upon the thread of an impatient gesture. The astrologers I have seen in India are such an illiterate, stupid-looking lot that I cannot imagine what beneficial advice they can give anyone. Ah, you must not confuse a learned scholar like Sudai Babu with those ignorant men you have encountered. Truly, those men are charlatans, but he is a highly intelligent Brahmin who lives in a large house of his own. He has made a deep study of the subject for many years and possesses many volumes of great rarity. It suddenly occurs to me that my companion is no fool. He belongs to that type of modern Hindu who is enthusiastically practical and who does not hesitate to avail himself of the latest resources of Western invention. He is even ahead of me in some ways. He carries a magnificent moving picture camera on the boat, whereas I can boast of nothing better than a humble pocket Kodak. His servant produces a thermos flask and pours out a cooling drink, thus rebuking my lamentable forgetfulness of an excellent traveling requisite. And I know from his talk that he makes more use of the telephone when in Bombay than I have ever cared to do when in Europe. And yet he believes in astrology. I puzzle over the incongruous elements which compose his character. Let us understand each other. You fully accept the theory that every man's career and every worldly event is controlled by stars whose distance from our planet is so great that it beggars imagination. Yes, I do, he answers quietly. I shrug my shoulders, not knowing what to say. He assumes an apologetic air. My dear sir, why not go and try him for yourself? You say in your country the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Find out what Sudhai Babu can discover about you. I have no use for the cheap charlatans myself, but I believe in that man's genuineness. I am skeptical about those who make a business of fortune-telling. Still, I shall take you at your word. Will you take me to this astrologer? Certainly. Come and have tiffin with me tomorrow, and then we shall visit him. We continue to float by broad palaces and old temples and little shrines bespattered with yellow flowers. I look indifferently at the broad stone steps crowded with bathing pilgrims and reflect that, though science rightly flatters itself with having put a check to superstition, I have yet to learn that a scientific attitude should put a check to investigation. If my companion can produce some evidential facts for the marked feeling of fatalism which he shares in common with most of his countrymen, I shall study them with an open mind. The next day, my amiable acquaintance brings me to a narrow, archaic street which runs through a heap of flat-topped houses. We stop before a rambling, old, stone-built structure. He leads the way through a dark, low-roofed passage, and then we climb several stone steps, which are no wider than a man's body. We pass through a narrow room and find ourselves on the veranda of a spacious inner courtyard around which the house has been built. A chained dog sights us and furiously barks a challenge. An array of large pots, each holding some tropical, flowerless plant, spreads along the veranda. I follow my companion into a dark, frowning room and nearly fall over some broken flagstones at the threshold. As I stoop, I notice that loose earth lies sprinkled in the room as freely as it is sprinkled on the veranda floor. Does the astrologer find relief from his starry studies in plant growing? I wonder. The other man shouts for the astrologer, whose name is echoed back to us by the ancient walls. We wait for 2 or 3 minutes and assist the dog by further calls for the astrologer to punctuate the silence of this seemingly deserted building. I begin to think that we have come on a fruitless errand, when the sound of someone stirring descends from an upper floor. Soon after, I hear shuffling steps approach our room. The figure of a slight man, carrying a candle in one hand and a jangling bunch of keys in the other, appears on the threshold. There follows a brief conversation in the semi-gloom, and the astrologer unlocks another door, through which we all pass. He draws aside 2 heavy curtains and opens the shutters which cover tall balcony windows. The astrologer's face is suddenly illuminated by the light which falls through the opened windows. I see a man who seems more like a figure from the ghost world than one of flesh and blood. Never before have I seen anyone so sicklied or with the pale cast of thought. His death-like countenance, incredibly lean body, and unearthly slow movements combine to produce a weird effect. The whites of his eyes are so pronounced as to heighten this impression, their whiteness offering a strong contrast to the jet-black pupils. He takes his seat at the large table, whose surface is littered with papers. I discover that he speaks tolerably good English, yet it is only after some persuasion that I can induce him to carry on a direct conversation without the aid of a third party as interpreter. Please understand that I come as an inquirer, not as a believer. I begin. He nods his thin head. Yes, I shall cast your horoscope, and then you must tell me if you are satisfied. What is your fee? I have no fixed charge. Some people of good position pay me 60 rupees. Others pay me 20 rupees. I leave the amount to you. I proceed to make it clear to him. Before we bother about the future, I want to test his knowledge of the past. He agrees. For a while, he busies himself with calculations over my birth date. After 10 minutes, he stoops to the floor behind his chair and searches among a disorderly pile of yellowed papers and palm-leaf manuscripts. Finally, he draws out a little bundle of oblong, time-stained slips. He sketches a queer diagram on the sheet of paper and says, "This is a chart of the heavens at the time you were born, and these Sanskrit texts explain the meaning of every part of the chart. Now I shall tell you what the stars declare." He scrutinizes the diagram with minute care, refers to one of the slips, and speaks again in that low, emotionless voice which befits his personality so well. You are a writer from the West. Am I correct? I nod in agreement. He tells me thereafter about my youth and describes, in quick succession, a few happenings of the earlier years of my life. In all, he gives me 7 important points about my past. 5 of them are broadly correct, but the other 2 are utterly wrong. Thus, I am able to check up on the value or worthlessness of his powers. The honesty of the man is transparent. I am already convinced that he is incapable of deliberate deception. A 75% success in an initial test is startling enough to show that Hindu astrology calls for investigation, but it also indicates that the latter is no precise, infallible science. Once again, Sudai Babu burrows among his scattered papers, and then describes my character with a fair degree of accuracy. After that, he pictures the mental capacities which have brought me to follow a profession congenial to them. Here again, when he lifts his intellectual head and asks, "Have I read correctly?" I cannot dispute his words. He shuffles his paper, silently studies the diagram, and begins to speak of the future. The world will become your home. You shall travel far and wide, yet always you will carry a pen and do your writing work. And in this strain he discourses of what is yet to be. But I can run no investigating rule over his prophecies, so I am content to leave them where I find them, written in the stars. With his last words, he again asks if I am satisfied. His fairly correct description of my past 40 years on this amazing planet, his almost completely successful effort to show me my mental self, these things silence the criticisms which I have come prepared to utter. I want to ask myself, is this man merely drawing a bow at a venture? Is he doing nothing more than a bit of smart guesswork? But I must candidly confess that his prognostications impress me. Yet time alone can tell whether there is any worth in them or not. Is my Western attitude toward the dark question of fate to tumble about me like a house of thin cards? What can I say about the matter? I move over to the window and stand there, staring out at the opposite house and jingling the silver rupees in my pocket. Finally, I return to my seat and question the astrologer. Why should it seem impossible to you that such distant stars can influence the lives of men? He rejoins softly, do not the tides respond to the distant moon in their ebb and flow? Does not the body of a woman undergo a change every lunar month? Does not the absence of the sun make men more liable to depressed moods? Quite so, but that is a far cry from asserting the claims of astrology. Why should Jupiter or Mars care 2 annas whether I meet with shipwreck or not? He looks at me with an unruffled face. It is better that you regard the planets as being only symbols which stand in the sky. It is not they which really influences us, but our own past, he replies. You will never understand the reasonable nature of astrology unless you accept the doctrine that man is born again and again, and that his fate follows him with every birth. If he escapes the results of his evil actions in one birth, they will punish him in the next. And if he does not receive a due reward for his good actions in one lifetime, he will surely receive it in the next. Without this doctrine of the continued return of man's soul to this earth, until such time as it becomes perfect, the changing fortunes of different persons would seem the result of mere chance or blind luck. How can that be allowed by a just deity? No, it is our belief that when a man dies, his character, desires, thoughts, and will continue to exist until they enter a body of flesh once more and come among us in the form of a newborn baby. The good or evil actions committed in the former birth will be suitably rewarded or punished in the present or even future births. This is how we explain fate. When I said that you would be shipwrecked one day and in grave danger of drowning, that is the fit destiny which God, in His hidden justice, has portioned out to you because of something wrong which you did in a former birth. It is not the planets which force you into shipwreck, but the inescapable results of your former actions. The planets and their positions only act as a record of this destiny. Why they should do so I cannot say, No man's brain could ever have invented astrology. It came to us from long ago, when it was revealed for man's benefit by the great seers of ancient times. As I listened to this plausible pronouncement, I hardly know what comment to make. He would bind one's soul and fortune to the stake of fate, but no healthy Westerner will let himself be despoiled of the prized possession of free will. What inhabitant of the energetic Occident can wax enthusiastic over this belief that it is destiny, and not choice, which directs him to take his steps? I gaze in bewilderment at this lean dreamer, this saddle wanderer through remote signs of the zodiac. Do you know, I tell him, that in some parts of the South the astrologers rank next to priests, and that nothing of any magnitude can be done without previously consulting them? We Europeans would laugh at such a position, for we do not look kindly upon predictive methods. We like to think that we are free individuals, and not the hapless victims of an inexorable destiny. The astrologer shrugs his shoulders. In one of our old books, the Hito Padesa, it is declared, no one is capable of opposing the predestinations of fate, which are written on the foreheads of men. He lets his words sink in, then he continues, what can you do? We must bear with the fruit of our actions. But I am dubious about this statement and express my feelings. The prophet of personal fortunes rises from his chair. I take the hint and prepare to leave him. He murmurs musingly, all is in the power of God. Nothing can escape him. Who of us is really free? Whither can we go where God is not? At the door he adds, hesitatingly, if you wish to come again, we may talk further on these matters. I thank him and accept the invitation. Very well, I shall expect you tomorrow after the sun has gone down, about the hour of 6. Next day I return with the dusk to the astrologer's house. I have no intention of accepting all that he tells me, but neither have I formed any plans for rejection. I come to listen, possibly to learn, though the latter rest on how far his statements can be verified by experiment. And at this time I am ready enough to make experiments, but only if sufficiently strong reasons can be given for them. Yet Sudai Babu's reading of my horoscope has stirred me to the perception that Hindu astrology is not superstitious nonsense, and that it may well warrant a deeper investigation. That thought presents the limit of my present attitude. We sit facing each other at his large writing table. A paraffin lamp throws a dim light upon the scene. Millions of other Indian homes are being lit tonight in the same way. I have 14 rooms in this house, the astrologer tells me. They are filled with ancient manuscripts, which are mostly written in Sanskrit. That explains why I need such a large house, although I live alone. Come and see my collection. He removes the hanging lamp and leads the way into another room. Open boxes are ranged around the wall. I peer inside one of them and find it full of books and papers. Even the floor of the room is hidden under a multitude of papers, bundles of palm leaf manuscripts, and books whose covers are discolored with age. I take a small bundle in my hand. Each leaf is covered with incomprehensible Vedic characters. We go from room to room and find the same scene everywhere. The astrologer's library appears to be in a state of hopeless disorder, but he assures me that he is familiar with the whereabouts of every book and paper. It seems to me that his house has gathered the wisdom of Hindustan. Surely, much of the strange lores of India is contained in the almost undecipherable pages of these ancient rolls of manuscript and in these Sanskrit books. We return to our chairs, and the other man informs me, nearly all my money has been spent in buying those manuscripts. Many of them are very rare and cost me large sums. So it is that I am very poor today. What subjects do they deal with? They deal with human life and divine mysteries, while many are concerned with astrology. Then you are also a philosopher. His thin mouth relaxes into a half-smile. A man who is not a good philosopher will become a poor astrologer. If you will pardon me for saying so, I hope you do not overstudy all those books. I was shocked at your pallor when I first met you. That is not surprising, he replies calmly. I have not eaten for 6 days. I express my concern. It is not a question of money. The woman who comes every day to cook for me is away ill. She has been away for 6 days. Then why not call in another woman? He shakes his head firmly. No, my food must not be cooked by a lower caste woman. I would rather not eat for a month than permit that to happen. I must wait till my servant's health is restored. But I expect her to return in a day or 2. I peer at him intently and notice that he wears the sacred thread of the sons of Brahma. The triple cord of woven linen which nestles under his chin is placed around the neck of every Brahmin baby and is never to be removed till death. So he is a Brahmin. Why trouble yourself with a superstitious caste restriction? I urge. Surely your health is more important than that. It is not superstition. Everyone gives out a magnetic influence which is quite real, even though the instruments of your Western science have not yet discovered it. The cook who prepares food throws her influence into it, unconsciously, of course. A cook of low character will thus taint the food with bad magnetism, which passes into the person who eats the food. What a strange theory, but it is true. I changed the subject. How long have you been an astrologer? For 19 years. I took up the profession after my marriage. Ah, I understand. No, I am not a widower. Shall I explain? When I was a youth of 13, I prayed often to God for knowledge, and was led to various people who taught me and to different books. I became so fascinated by study that I would sit up reading all day and far into the night. My parents arranged a marriage for me. A few days after we were married, my wife got angry with me and said, I have married a human book. On the 8th day, she ran away with the man who used to drive our carriage. Sudhi Babu pauses. I cannot help smiling at his wife's caustic comment, though her speedy elopement must have created a sensation in conservative India. But the ways of women are torturous and beyond the compass of a man's mind. After a while, I recovered from the shock, he continues, and forgot her. All my emotions were blotted out, and went deeper than ever into the study of astrology and the divine mysteries. It is then that I took up my greatest study, the book of Brahmachinta. Perhaps you will tell me what that book is concerned with. The title can be translated as Divine Meditation, or as The Quest of Brahma, or even as God Knowledge. The entire work contains several thousand pages, but the part I study is only a section. It took me nearly 20 years to collect even that, because it exists only in scattered parts here and there. I've slowly obtained these different parts through the agents in the various provinces of India. There are 12 chief divisions among its subjects, and many subdivisions. The chief topics are philosophy, astrology, yoga, life after death, and other deep matters. Do you know if there's an English translation of the book? He shakes his head. I have never heard of one. Few even are the Hindus who know of the existence of the book. Hitherto it has been jealously guarded and kept secret. It came originally from Tibet, where it is looked upon as very sacred and only chosen students are allowed to study it. When was it written? It was composed thousands of years ago by the sage Bhrigu, who lived so long that I cannot give you the date. It teaches a method of yoga, which is quite different from all others which exist in India. You are interested in yoga, are you not? How do you know that? For answer, Sudhi Babu quietly produces the chart which he has constructed around my birth date and moves his pencil around the strange glyphs which represent planetary configurations and zodiacal signs. Your horoscope surprises me. It is out of the ordinary for a European, and not even a common one for an Indian. It shows that you will have a great tendency to study yoga and that you will enjoy the favor of sages who will help you to delve deeply into the subject. Yet you will not limit yourself to yoga alone, but become versed in other mystic philosophies. He looks at me straight in the eyes. I receive the subtle impression that he is about to make a statement which will be tantamount to a revelation of his inner life. There are two kinds of sages: those who selfishly keep their knowledge to themselves, and those who, after obtaining enlightenment, share it freely with others who are seeking for it. Your horoscope shows that you are almost at the gate of illumination, and therefore my words will not fall on deaf ears. I am ready to impart my knowledge to you. I am taken aback at this strange turn of affairs. I first come to Sudi Babu to check up on the claims of Indian astrology. I come again to listen to his further defense of its basic postulate, and now he unexpectedly offers to become my teacher in yoga. If you will practice the methods of Brahmachinta, you will need no teacher. He continues, your own soul will become your teacher. I suddenly realize my mistake and wonder whether he has read my thoughts. You take me by surprise, is all I can say. I have already instructed a few persons in this knowledge, but I never regard myself as their master, only as their brother or friend. So I do not undertake to become your teacher in the ordinary sense. The spirit of the sage Brigu will simply use this body of mine to communicate his teachings to you. I do not understand how you can combine the profession of astrology with the teaching of a yoga system. His thin hands spread themselves upon the table. The explanation is this: I live in the world and serve it through my work, which happens to be astrology. Secondly, I refuse to be looked upon as a teacher of yoga because in our Brahmachinta, the only teacher acknowledged is God. He is the only preceptor we acknowledge. He, as the universal soul, is in us and will teach us. Look on me as a brother, if you wish, but do not look on me as a spiritual preceptor. Those who have a teacher are too apt to lean on him and to depend on him instead of their own soul. And yet you depend on astrology for guidance, I retort quickly, instead of your own soul. You are not right. I never look at my own horoscope now. In fact, I tore it up many years ago. I express astonishment at this statement. He replies, I have found the light and do not need astrology to guide me. But those who still walk in darkness find it helpful. I have placed my life entirely in the Lord's hands. I carry that act to its proper conclusion by giving up all care about future or past. Whatever the Lord sends, that I accept as His will. I have given my whole self, body, mind, actions, and feelings to the will of the Almighty. Suppose you are threatened with death by a murderous ruffian. Would you do nothing and accept that as God's will? When any danger arises, I know that I have only to pray and instantly to receive His protection. Prayer is necessary, but fear is not. I pray frequently, and the Lord has marvelously protected me. Yet I have been through great troubles. Through all of them I was conscious of His help, and I trust Him fully under every event. One day you too will disregard the future and become indifferent to it. There will have to be a remarkable change in me before that happens, I observed dryly. That change will surely come. Are you certain? Yes, you cannot escape your destiny. This spiritual rebirth is an event which comes from God, whether one looks for it or not. You say strange things, Sudai Babu. The idea of deity is the unknown factor which enters into so many of my conversations in this land. The Hindus are essentially religious, and I am often tantalized by the familiar way in which they introduce mention of God. Is it possible for them to appreciate the viewpoint of a doubting Westerner who has surrendered simple faith for complex reason? I realize that it will be unavailing and suit no practical purpose to throw up this question of deity into argument with the astrologer. I have no taste for partaking of any theological diet which he will probably place before me, so I turn the subject back to less controversial ground. Let us talk of other matters, for God and I have never met. He looks at me fixedly, his peculiar black and white eyes searching my soul. The chart of your horoscope cannot be wrongly drawn, or I might keep back my knowledge from an unready mind. But the stars move without fault. What you are unable to grasp today will linger in your thoughts for a time and then return with double force. I tell you again that I am ready to impart the way of Brahmachinta to you, and I am ready to learn it. Evening after evening, I visit the old stone house of the astrologer and receive my lessons in Brahmachinta. The pale lamplight throws flickering patterns upon his narrow face as he initiates me into the arcana of this primitive Tibetan yoga system. At no time does he adopt the attitude of spiritual superiority or egotistic tutorship. He is humility personified and usually prefaces his instruction with the phrase, "In this teaching of Brahmachinta, it is said." What is the supreme object, the final goal of this yoga of Brahmachinta? I ask him one evening. We seek the condition of sacred trance, for in that condition, man obtains perfect proof that he is a soul. Then it is that he frees his mind from his surroundings. Objects fade away and the outside world seems to disappear. He discovers the soul as a living, real being within himself. Its bliss, peace, and power overwhelm him. All he needs is a single experience of this kind to obtain the proof that there is a divine and undying life in himself. Never again can he forget it. A shred of doubt prompts my inquiry. Are you sure that all this is not a deep form of autosuggestion? A ghost of a smile curls around his lips. When a mother gives birth to a child, is it possible that she can doubt even for a single moment what is happening? And when she comes to look back on that experience, could she ever think that it was only an autosuggestion? And when she watches her child grow up beside her year after year, can she hesitate at any time and disbelieve in its existence? In the same way, the labor of spiritual rebirth comes as such a tremendous event in one's life that it cannot be forgotten. It changes everything for one. When one enters into the sacred trance, a kind of vacuum is created within the mind. God, or as you do not seem to care for that word, the soul, the higher power, shall I say, enters and fills that vacuum. When that happens, it is impossible to avoid becoming filled with intense happiness. One also feels a great love for the whole of creation. The whole body will appear to an observer to be not only in a trance, but apparently dead, for all breathing stops when the deepest point is attained. Is that not dangerous? No. The trance is attained in complete solitude, or a friend may be permitted to watch over one. I frequently enter into the sacred trance and can always emerge from it whenever I wish. I usually stay in it for 2 or 3 hours, and fix the time of its ending beforehand. It is a wonderful experience because what you see as the universe, I see again within myself. That is why I say that all you need to learn can be learnt from your own soul. After I have communicated the complete yoga of Brahmachinta to you, no master will be necessary. You will need no outside guidance. You've never had a teacher yourself? None. I have never looked for one, since I discovered the secrets of Brahmachinta. Nevertheless, some great masters have come to me from time to time. This has happened when I have entered the sacred trance and become conscious in the inner world. These great sages have appeared before me in their psychic forms and placed their hands on my head in blessing. Therefore, I say again, trust the guidance of your own soul, and teachers will come unbidden to you in the inner world. For the next 2 minutes there is a brooding silence. The other man seems to be caught up in a cloud of thoughts. Then very quietly, very humbly, this strange tutor says, "Once, during this sacred trance, I saw Jesus." "You mystify me," I exclaim. But he does not hasten to explain. Instead, he suddenly rolls the whites of his eyes upwards in a most alarming manner. There is another minute of intense silence, and only when he brings his eyes back to their normal appearance am I reassured. When he addresses me again, a faintly enigmatical smile hovers once more around his lips. Such is the greatness of this sacred trance, that death cannot catch a man while he is in it. There are some yogis on the Tibetan side of the Himalayas who have practiced to perfection this path of Brahmachinta. Because it pleases them to do so, they have secluded themselves in mountain caves, where they have entered the profoundest degree of the sacred trance. In that condition, the pulse stops, the heart no longer beats, and the blood does not flow through the unmoving body. Anyone finding them would think they were dead. Do not imagine that they have gone into a kind of sleep, because they are as fully conscious as you or I. They have entered the inner world where they live higher lives. Their minds have become released from the limits set by the body, and they discover the whole universe within themselves. One day, they will come out of their trance, but then they will be many hundreds of years old. So once again I hear this incredible tradition of perennial human life. Apparently it will follow my feet wherever I go under this eastern sun. But shall I ever track down one of these legendary immortals and behold him face to face? And will the West ever discover and accept, as a scientific and psychological contribution, this ancient magic cradled in the bleak climate of Tibet? Who knows? My last lesson in the fantastic doctrines of the Yoga of Brahmachinta comes to an end. I persuade the sedentary astrologer to venture out of his house, which he rarely leaves, and give his limbs a little exercise. We wander through narrow alleys in an effort to avoid the packed bazaars which bar our way to the river. With all its ancient squalor and unhygienic overcrowding, Benares nevertheless presents a variety of colorful sights to the man who wanders its streets afoot. It is afternoon, and my companion carries an open, flat parasol on his shoulder so as to keep off the sun's rays. His frail figure and weary, languid movements do not conduce to quick progress, and I change our route in order to shorten our journey. We pass into the street of the brass workers. The air rings with the hammers of bearded craftsmen and their products. Shining brazen vessels gleam in the sunlight. Here, too, are the multitudes of little brass images, earthly representations of the chief gods in the Hindu pantheon. An old man crouches in the shade by the roadside in another street. He looks up at me with feeble eyes and pathetic face. His fear removed, he begs for alms. We drift through the street of the merchants of grain, where little wooden platforms exhibit piles of red and golden grains. The shopkeepers sit on folded legs or squat on haunch and heel beside their goods. They throw a few glances at the odd couple that passes by, and then resume their patient waiting for customers. Odors mingle indiscriminately in the other streets. As we approach the river, we walk right into a region which seems to be a hunting ground for those who seek alms. Lean beggars drag themselves along the dusty road. One of them comes near to me and looks inquiringly into my eyes. He possesses a face of unspeakable melancholy. My heart is moved embarrassingly. Farther on, I nearly stumble over a fleshless old woman whose body is a bunch of hanging skin and protruding bones. She, too, glances into my eyes. There is no reproach, only dull acceptance. I bring out my purse. Immediately she becomes an animated creature once again. She extends a skinny arm and takes the proffered coins. I tremble at my own good fortune in having plenty of food, good clothes, proper shelter, and other desirable things. When I think of the haunting eyes of those unfortunate wretches, I feel guilty. But what right do I enjoy the possession of so many rupees, so many annas, when those poor beggars own nothing more than rags? Suppose by some accident of birth or fluke of fate, I had been born in the place of one of them. I play for a while with this ghastly thought, but horror eventually causes me to send it into oblivion. What is the meaning of this mystery of chance, which by the mere fortune of birth puts one man in dirt-stained rags upon this road, and another in silken robes in yonder riverside palace? Life is truly a dark enigma. I cannot comprehend it. "Let us sit down here," says the astrologer when we reach the Ganges. We sit in the shade and look down the river upon the stretch of broad stone steps, rambling terraces, and jutting platforms. Little groups of pilgrims are constantly coming and going. The shapely forms of two slender minarets soar gracefully into the pearly sky to a height of nearly 300 feet. They mark the charming mosque of Aurangzeb, that Mohammedan anachronism in this most Hindu of Hindu cities. But the astrologer has noted my sad preoccupation with beggars, for he turns his sallow face towards me and says, "India is a poor country." His voice is somewhat apologetic. Its people have been sunk in inertia. The English race possess some fine points, and I believe that God brought them to our country for its benefit. Before they came, life was unsafe. Law and justice were often set aside. It is my hope that the English will not leave India. We need their help, but it should be given in friendship now and not by force. However, the destiny of both nations must fulfill itself. "Ah, your fatalism returns again." He ignores my comment and falls into silence. At length he asks, "How can the two peoples avoid God's will? Day is ever followed by night, and night is ever followed by day. So it is with the history of nations. Great changes brood over the world. India has been sunk in sloth and inertia, but she will change until she becomes filled with desires and ambitions, which will precede activity. Europe burns with practical activities, but the strength of its materialism will pass away, and it will turn its face towards higher ideals. It will seek out the inner things, and the same will happen to America." I listen in silence. For this reason, the philosophic and spiritual teachings of our land will travel towards the West like a wave of the ocean. He continues gravely, "Scholars have already translated some of our Sanskrit manuscripts and sacred books into Western languages, but many texts are hidden away in cave libraries in out-of-the-way parts of India, Nepal, and Tibet. Those too must eventually be made known to the world. The time will come, before long, when the ancient philosophies and inner knowledge of India shall unite with the practical sciences of the West. The secrecy of past times must give way to the needs of this century. I am glad that all this will happen." I stare into the greenish water of the Ganges. The river is so strangely tranquil that it hardly seems to flow. Its surface shimmers in the sunlight. He addresses me yet again. "The destiny of each race of people must be realized, just as the destiny of every person must be fulfilled. The Lord is omnipotent. Men and nations cannot escape from their self-earned fate, but they may be protected throughout their troubles and even saved from great dangers. And how does one obtain such protection? By prayer, by keeping a childlike nature when one turns towards the Almighty, and by remembering Him not on one's lips, but in one's heart, especially before he begins any action. In happy days, try to enjoy them as a blessing of God, and in troubles try to think that it is very much like a medicine to heal your inner disease. Fear Him not, as He is all-merciful." You do not believe that God is remote from this world, then? No, God is a spirit which is hidden in people and throughout this universe. If you see any beauty in nature, a beautiful landscape, for instance, do not worship it for its own sake, but remember that it is beautiful because of the deity present in it. See the divinity in objects and people, but do not be so captivated by the outer forms that you forget the inner spirit which gives them life. You mingle your doctrines of fate, religion, and astrology in a peculiar manner, Sudai Babu." He gazes solemnly at me. "Why so? These doctrines are not of my creation. They have descended to us from the most distant ages of the past. The tremendous power of destiny, the worship of our Creator, and the lore of planetary influences were known to the earliest peoples. They were not such savages as you Westerners imagine. But have I not prophesied? The West will rediscover before this century closes how real are these invisible forces which enter into the lives of all men. It will be extremely hard for the West to give up its inborn notion that a man's will is free to make or mar his own life. Whatever happens is by his will, and what seems like free will really works by His power. The Almighty returns to men the good or evil fruits of their thoughts and deeds in earlier bodies. It is best to accept His will, but one will not tremble under sorrows if one looks to Him for the strength to endure them. Let us hope that you are right, for the sake of those unfortunate beggars whom we have just encountered. That is the only answer I can make," he rejoins shortly. If you would follow the path into your own soul, the way of Brahmachinta, which I have shown you, these problems would clear themselves. I realize that he has now conducted me to the limits of his argumentative possibilities, and that I must find my own way henceforth. One of my coat pockets hides a fateful telegram that bids me whisk myself into a train out of Benares. In another pocket there reposes a folding kodak. I ask the astrologer to pose for his photograph. He politely declines. I press him insistently. "But why?" he remonstrates. "My ugly face and shabby clothes? Please, your photograph will remind me of you in later years when I may be in distant lands." "The best reminder," he replies gently, "will be holy thoughts and unselfish deeds." I yield to his objection reluctantly, and the camera disappears again into my pocket. When he rises to return at last and I begin to follow him, I discover close by a seated figure who has taken shelter from the terrific sun under a huge round bamboo umbrella. His face is fixed in rapt meditation, and I perceive by the ochre color of his robe that he is a holy man belonging to a superior order. We go a little way and find a cow, possibly a member of the sacred variety which abounds in Benares, sleeping in that strange posture familiar to its kind. It lies across our track with legs doubled back under its abdomen. We reach the shop of a money changer, where I hail a carriage, and then our ways part. I indulge in an orgy of traveling during the next few days. I spend my nights in wayside rest houses put up by a paternal government for traveling officials and other persons who have to journey into the interior. One of these rest houses possesses no amenities worth mentioning, but I discover that it has a plentiful population of ants. After 2 hours, slow torture, and vain efforts to repel their attacks, I decide to leave the bed and spend the night in a chair. Time trickles by unpleasantly until my thoughts let go of their surroundings and fasten themselves upon the fatalistic philosophy of the Benares astrologer. Simultaneously, I remember the wretched beggars who dragged their hungry bodies along the road. Life does not let them live and does not let them die. The wealthy Marwari money lender may pass them in his ornate, comfortably sprung carriage, but they accept him as they accept their misery, with a complete submission to the will of God. In this land of a burning sky, even the pitiful leper seems content with his lot. Such is the narcotic fatalism which creeps into the bones of so many Indians. I realize how vain it is for the Occidental partisan of free will to argue with the Oriental advocate of an all-powerful destiny. To the latter there is but one side to the problem, the side which unquestioningly accepts the dogma that there is no problem. Fate rules his roost, and there is nothing more to be said. What self-reliant Westerner likes to hear that we are but marionettes which dangle from the strings of fate, and which move up and down, or from right to left at the bidding of an unseen hand? I remember that remarkable outburst of Napoleon before his army's brilliant dash across the Alps. Impossible, there is no such word in my dictionary. But I have studied and restudied the fascinating records of Napoleon's entire life, and memory brings back to me strange lines which he wrote down at St. Helena, where his colossal brain raced again and again over the past. I was always a fatalist. What is written in the heavens is written. My star grew dim. I felt the reins slip from my hands, and yet I could do nothing. The man who held such paradoxical, contradictory beliefs could not have solved the mystery, and one doubts whether anyone has ever completely solved it. It may be that ever since the brain of man commenced to function, this ancient problem has been discussed by people, all the way from the North Pole to the South. The cocksure, as usual, have settled it to their satisfaction. The philosophical still enter up the account of pros and cons, but hesitate to strike a balance. I have not forgotten the astrologer's surprisingly correct interpretation of my horoscope. At odd moments I have mused over it, until I wonder whether some of this Oriental fatalistic foolishness has crept into my head. Whenever I have remembered how this man of modest assumptions read my past, how he recalled the fluttering phenomena of bygone events back to temporary existence, I hesitate and feel tempted to collect material for a fat treatise upon his hoary problem of fate and free will. But I know that it will be a useless task to let my pen play with the thought of destiny, and that I may probably finish up in the same abysmal darkness with which I begin. For the problems of astrology will need to be brought in, and my task will become complicated beyond my power. Yet such are the gigantic strides of modern invention, and the day when we shall take Cook's tours to the distant planets may not be far off. It will then be possible to discover whether the starry frame possesses any real significance in our lives. Meanwhile, one may test the powers of an astrologer or two, bearing in mind Sudai Babu's warning about their fallibility and about the fragmentary nature of that portion of astrology which has been revealed to the world. And yet, even assuming and admitting that in some strange fourth-dimensional manner the future already exists, is it desirable to learn those secrets of personal destiny which are curtained from one's eyes? On this questioning note, my musings come to a dead end and sleep overtakes me. A few days later, I am in a town several hundred miles away from Benares, when the news comes of startling riots in the latter city. It is the unpleasant story of Hindu-Muslim strife, which usually begins in a petty way, but is used by ruffians who want a pseudo-religious pretext for their looting, maiming, and murdering. A reign of terror rules the city for several days. That lamentable period brings the usual tale of broken heads, tortured bodies, and indiscriminate slaying. I feel concerned for the astrologer's safety, but it is impossible to get in touch with him. The postmen are too scared to venture into the streets, and no private letter or telegram can be delivered. I am compelled to wait until King Mab is dethroned in Benares, and then dispatch one of the first wires which penetrate the unhappy city. Back comes a simple letter of thanks in which the astrologer ascribes his safety to the protection of the Almighty, and upon the reverse side of the paper he has inscribed 10 rules of practice of the Yoga of Brahmachinta. Chapter 13. The Garden of the Lord. Out of the scurrying of my feet hither and thither over the face of North India, 2 tracks converge upon a unique little colony, which is housed in a town that bears the poetical name of Dayalbag, the Garden of the Lord. One of the tracks starts in Lucknow, where I have the good offices of Sundarlal Nigam as guide, philosopher, and friend during my stay in that picturesque city. We roam the city together and talk philosophy as we roam. He is, I suppose, not more than 21 or 22, but like many of his Indian brothers, he has matured early. We wander through the old Mughal palaces and muse upon the inexorable fate which has overtaken the vanished kings. I fall in love anew with the glorious Indo-Persian architecture, whose graceful curves and delicate colorings reveal the refined taste of its creators. How shall I ever forget these bright days when I idled among the orange trees of the royal pleasure gardens which grace Lucknow? We explore colorful edifices, where once the seductive favorites of the old kings of Oud flaunted their olive-skinned beauty upon marble balconies and in golden baths. Now these palaces are empty of royal flesh and hold only memories. I return again and again to a beautiful mosque which stands near the quaintly named Monkey Bridge. Its exterior is white throughout and gleams in the sunlight like a fairy palace. The shapely minarets seem to rise in perpetual prayer to bright heaven. Peeping inside, I see a crowd of worshippers prostrating themselves upon the ground and rhythmically invoking Allah. The scene receives accentuated charm from the brightly colored little rugs upon which the devout perform their prostrations. None can doubt the fervor of these followers of the Prophet, for their religion seems a living force to them. Amid all these excursions and peregrinations, I become gradually impressed by certain characteristics belonging to my young guide. His shrewd remarks, his exceptional intellectuality, and his matter-of-fact attitude towards mundane affairs are somehow blent with the depth and mysticism of a student of yoga. It is only after repeated meetings and ardent discussions, during which I become aware that he is sounding and probing my own beliefs and ideas, that he reveals himself to be a member of a semi-secret fraternity called Radha Soamis. I pick up the second track, which leads me to Dayalbag from Malik, another member of the same brotherhood. He comes within my orbit at another place and time. As Indians go, he is a fine, fair-skinned, stalwart fellow. For centuries, his people have had as neighbors wild frontier tribes who keep covetous eyes on their neighbors' possessions. But the wise British government is taming these restless fire-eaters not by recourse to the old methods of endless fighting, but by taking them into its service and pay. Malik is superintending some of the fierce tribesmen who have submitted to the more pacific and useful occupations of making roads across hill and desert, constructing bridges, and building defense forts and barracks. Many of these wild-looking persons carry their rifles, more perhaps from old habit than from present need. They are at work all along the stretch of the northwest frontier, making new routes for traders and new defenses for soldiers. Malik works hard and well near Dera Ismail Khan, that frontier outpost of the empire. His character harmoniously couples a sturdy self-reliance and intense practicality with nobility of character and profound thought. I am impressed by the careful balance of his qualities. After a strong initial reticence, which is in accord with all the ancient traditions of yoga, he reluctantly yields to my inquiries and admits that he has a master whom he periodically visits whenever his service leaves permit him to do so. His master, whose name is Sahabji Maharaj, is head of the Radha Soamis, and I learned for the second time that his master has conceived the astonishing and interesting notion of combining a yoga discipline with a daily life based on Western ways and ideas. The friendly efforts of these two men, Nigam and Malik, bear fruit at last. I am to be the guest of His Holiness Sahabji Maharaj, who is uncrowned king of the Radha Soamis' own town of Dayalbag. I motor the few dusty miles of road from Agra to the colony. Dayalbag, the garden of the Lord. If my early impression is correct, the founder is striving to keep the town true to its beautiful name. I am taken to a building which houses the master's private office. The waiting room is furnished in an attractive European style. From my restful, easy chair, I can appreciate the nicely painted walls and the refined simplicity of the furniture. Here is Westernization with a vengeance. I have encountered yogis in bare, drab bungalows, in lonely mountain caves, and in gloomy thatched huts on river banks, but never have I expected to find one of the tribe housed in such a modern environment. What manner of man is the leader of this unusual fraternity, I wonder? I am not left long in doubt, for the door slowly opens and he himself walks in. His figure is of medium height. His head is wrapped in a spotless white turban. His features are refined, though not typically Indian. With a slightly paler skin, he might have passed for a quiet American. A pair of large spectacles cover his eyes, and a short mustache adorns his upper lip. He wears the high-necked, many-buttoned long coat, which is the Indian tailor's adaptation of our Western style. His bearing as he approaches is modest and gentle. He welcomes me with courtly dignity. Our greeting over, I wait till he has settled down in his chair and then ventured to compliment him on the artistic decorations of the room. A row of brilliant teeth gleams across his mouth as he smiles his reply. God is not only love, but beauty. As man begins to express the spirit within him, he should express more beauty, not only in self, but in surroundings and environments. His English is noticeably well spoken, the voice is quick and confident. There is a little period of silence, and then he speaks again. But there is another decoration upon a room's wall and furnishings which is invisible, yet it is very important. Do you know that these things carry the influence of people's thoughts and feelings? Every room, every chair even, gives out the unseen influence of the person who has constantly used it. You may not see this atmosphere, but it is nevertheless there, and all who enter within its range are unconsciously affected by it to varying degrees. Do you mean that there are electrical or magnetic radiations around objects which reflect human characters? Quite so. Thoughts are real things on their own plane, and they attach themselves, for shorter or longer periods, to whatever we consistently use. That is an interesting theory. It is more than a theory, it is a fact. Man possesses a subtler body than the physical, and in this subtle body, there exist centers of activity which correspond to the physical organs of sense activity. Through these centers, he can discern invisible forces, for, when they are energized, they bestow psychic and spiritual sight. A brief pause follows, and then he asks my impressions of India's condition. I frankly criticize his country's neglect of modern ways of living, its slowness in picking up all those pleasant comforts, handy conveniences, and mechanical inventions which improve man's brief sojourn in this world, its inattention to the demands of sensible hygiene and proper sanitation, and its excessive devotion to stupid social customs and cruel practices which are supposedly based on religious practices. I tell him freely that priestly preoccupations seem to have kept India's energy in a cul-de-sac, with deplorable results. I instance some of the irrational things which I have seen done in the name of religion, but which merely succeed in proving how men can neglect or misuse the gift of intelligence which their God has bestowed upon them. My outspoken observations draw a definite assent from the lips of Sahabji Maharaj. You have hit on the very points which form part of my program of reform, he remarks, gazing at me reminiscently. On the whole, it seems that many Indians expect God to do for them what they are perfectly capable of doing for themselves. Exactly. We Hindus talk glibly of religion in order to cover up a lot of things which have nothing to do with religion. The trouble is that for the first 50 years or so, a religion is pure and vital. Later, it degenerates into a mere philosophy. Its followers become talkers, not religiously living men. Finally, it descends, for its last and longest phase, into the arms of hypocritical priests. In the end, hypocrisy becomes accepted as religion. I gasp at such straightforward admissions. What is the use of wrangling about heaven and hell, about God and so forth? Humanity finds itself on the physical plane, and it ought not to neglect the matters which pertain to this plane. Let us try to make our life here more beautiful and happier, he concludes. That is why I have sought you out. Your disciples seem such fine men, straining to be as practical and up-to-date as any European, making no parade of religion but living good lives, and withal, they keep to their yoga practices with faithful regularity. Sahabji smiles in acknowledgement. I am glad that you have observed that, he replies quickly. By setting up these activities at Dayalbag, I am attempting to show the world the same thing, that a man can be perfectly spiritual without running away to caves, and that he can reach the highest attainments in yoga while carrying on with worldly avocations. If you can succeed in that effort, the world may think a lot more of Indian teachings than it does now. We are going to succeed, comes the confident answer. Let me tell you a story. When I first came here to begin the colony, one of my chief desires was to have plenty of trees about the place. But outsiders told me that it was impossible to grow trees in this barren, sandy soil. The Yamuna is not far off, and the site is one of its old tracks, an ancient riverbed, in short. There were no experts among us, and we had to learn by frequent experiment and constant failure which kind of tree could live in such unpromising soil. Almost all the trees planted during the first year, and there were over 8,000 of them, died off. However, one tree thrived. We noted it and kept up our endeavors. Now there are 9,000 healthy trees going in Dayalbag. I tell you this because it is symbolical of the attitude with which we are facing our problems. We found barren ground here. It seems so worthless that no one else would buy it. Look how it has been transformed. Then it is your aim to build an Arcadia near Agra? He laughs. I tell him of my desire to see the town. Certainly, I shall arrange it for you at once. See Dayalbag first, and then we can talk about its why and wherefore. You will understand my ideas better when you can see them in practice. He rings a business-like bell. A few minutes later, I'm walking on a tour of inspection along half-finished streets and among bright-looking factory buildings. My guide is Captain Sharma, who was formerly in the Indian Army Medical Service, but who now is devoting all his services to the constructive effort which is being made here by his master. A quick reading of his character conveys the impression of another successful combination of Western striving with sincere spirituality. The luxuriant avenue provides the entrance to Dayalbagh, which is a clean little town. All the streets are bordered by shady trees. Some beautiful flower gardens adorn the central place. I am told that they represent repeated efforts to conquer dry desert, which does not take kindly to horticultural activity. A mulberry tree which was planted by Sahabji Maharaj in 1915 when he began to build his colony stands as a symbol of his appreciation of an artistic background. The industrial quarter's chief feature is a group of workshops which are called model industries. They are sensibly designed, light, airy, clean, and spacious. My first steps take me into the footwear factory. Busy driving belts hum continuously from an overhead spindle and set a long line of machines in operation. The dusty mechanics work with deft hands amid the din and seem as expert at their task as the operators I have seen in huge English factories at Northampton. The workshop manager tells me that he had learned his technique in Europe, whither he had gone to study 20th century methods of leather goods manufacture. Boots, shoes, sandals, handbags, and belts pass noisily through all the processes of mechanical manufacture. The men at the machines had begun as raw novices and were taught and trained to their work by the manager. Some of the goods produced find a local outlet in Dayalbagh and in Agra, while the rest goes to more distant cities. Shops are being opened in the latter places, the sales organization being based on the multiple store idea. I pass into the next building, which proves to be a textile factory. The products are mercerized cloths and silks, which are made in a limited range of patterns. In another building, I find an up-to-date engineering machine shop, a smithy, and a molding shop, where a monster sledgehammer sounds the active inspiration of the place with each of its power-operated thuds. Scientific instruments, laboratory apparatus, balances, and weights are being made in a nearby workshop and made well enough to have won the patronage of the United Provinces government. I watch the delicate operations of gold, nickel, and brass electroplating. The other departments of model industries are busily producing electric fans, gramophones, knives, and furniture. One of the mechanics has invented a special type of sound box, and this too will be manufactured in the near future. I am surprised to discover a fountain pen workshop and learn that it is the first one to come into existence in India. A long series of experiments have been necessary before the first pen could be marketed. One thing has baffled these industrial pioneers: how to put the iridium tip on gold nibs. They hope to discover the secret one day, but meanwhile, the nibs are sent to a European firm to undergo the process of tipping. A complete printing equipment at the Dayalbagh Press looks after the town's print needs, both in the business and literary fields. I inspect samples of its output in 3 languages: Hindu, Urdu, and English. A small weekly newspaper, the Prem Pacharak, is also run off the machines and posted to many Radha-Swaminists living in the distant parts of the country. In every building I find workers who are not merely satisfied but positively enthusiastic. A trade union would be an utter anomaly in this place. Everyone does his job, whether it be high or low, as though it were a real pleasure and not a task. The town possesses its own electrical generating installation, which provides the power for all the machinery in factories and for the ventilating ceiling fans in larger houses. In addition, every house is electrically illuminated at communal expense, thus avoiding the necessity of costly meters. The agriculture section contains a small but modern farm which is still in an early stage of development. A steam tractor and a steam plow are amongst the mechanical equipment. The chief products are fresh vegetables and cow fodder. Perhaps the most efficiently organized section is the dairy farm. Nowhere else in India have I seen its like. It constitutes a model dairy fit for exhibition purposes. Every head of cattle is a picked specimen, which provides a significant and favorable contrast to the animals one need not go further than Agra to see. Scrupulous cleanliness is observed in the stalls, and I am told that the scientific methods pursued have resulted in a substantially higher yield of milk than that obtained in the average Indian dairy. A pasteurizing and refrigerating plant has enabled these inhabitants of Dayalbagh and Agra, who appreciate good, germ-free milk, to obtain it for the first time. Another imported appliance is an electrical butter-making machine. All the credit for this section goes to a son of Sahabji Maharaj. That energetic and efficient young man informs me that he traveled to the chief dairying centers of England, Holland, Denmark, and the United States in order to learn the most up-to-date methods used in his work. The supply of water for the farms, as well as for the rest of the town, proved a difficult problem in the colony's early days. An irrigation canal was dug and a waterworks installation erected. But expanding demand forced Sahabji Maharaj to seek additional sources of supply. He enlisted the help of government engineers, who bored a deep tube well with successful results. The colony possesses its own banking institution, a strongly built structure with iron-grilled windows bearing the words Radha Soami General and Assurance Bank Limited. The bank has an authorized capital of 20 lakhs of rupees and not only transacts private banking business but controls the town's finances. Radha Soami Educational Institute stands in the center of Dayalbagh. It is fitly placed, for it is the finest building in the colony. Its 200 feet of red brickwork look well to a Western eye. The windows are shaped into Gothic arches and surrounded by white marble. Flowering gardens front the edifice. This modern high school has several hundred students and is managed by a principal and 32 qualified teachers. The latter are idealists who are young, enthusiastic, and filled with their desire to serve both their pupils and their master, Sahabji Maharaj. A high standard of general education is maintained. No formal religious teaching is given, but an effort is made to develop noble character. In addition, Sahabji Maharaj visits the boys from time to time, and every Sunday delivers a spiritual talk to the assembled school. The boys are encouraged to practice sports. Hockey, football, cricket, and tennis are their favorites. A library with 7,000 books and a curious little museum complete the institute. Another magnificent building houses the girls' college, which is conducted on similar lines. It represents a determined effort by Sahabji Maharaj to break down within his own sphere of influence the unenviable illiteracy which was forced on Indian women until recently. The Technical College is the youngest of the educational institutions. It provides courses in mechanical, electrical, and automobile engineering and trains mechanicians and foremen for manufacturing industries. Special machines and benches have been placed in the model industries section for the use of college students, so that classroom instruction goes hand in hand with practical experience under factory conditions. There are several attractive hostels for the hundreds of pupils who attend the three colleges. Each hostel is light, airy, and modern. The residential part of the town is under the supervision of the Dayalbagh Building Department, which provides the plans and erects all houses. Each street possesses its own pleasant harmony of architecture, and it is evident that artistic unity is one of the ideals of these town planners. Ugly erections and defective, shoddy buildings are barred, because a prospective tenant is free to choose his style of house only from the department's own plans. 4 sizes of residence have been standardized at graded and fixed prices. The buyer pays actual cost plus a small percentage. The colony maintains a bright little hospital and a maternity home. It has fixed its aim at being self-contained in every way, so that I am hardly surprised when I learn that the uniformed policeman who brings his hand to a smart salute is also a member of the Radha Soami fraternity. Yet his presence raised a piquant note of inquiry in my mind, for I expect that the level of morality in Dialbag is so high as to render crime conspicuous by its absence. He is here to protect the place from undesirable intruders. When Sahabji Maharaj is able to spare me a little time again from the pressure of his heavy duties, I pay my meed of tribute to his praiseworthy achievement and then tell him of my astonishment at finding such a progressive town in an unprogressive India. But, I ask, how do you finance it? You have surely spent a great sum in capital outlay. You will probably have an opportunity later of seeing the money come in, he returns. The members of the Radha Soami fraternity are themselves financing the colony. There is no compulsion on them to do this, nor are subscriptions required from them, but they regard it as a religious duty to give what they can to help Dialbag grow. But although we have had to depend on these contributions during the initial stages, my aim is to make it completely self-supporting. I shall not rest until we approach the stage of complete independence. You have wealthy supporters, then? Not at all. The rich Radha Soamis can be counted on the fingers of one hand. Our members are all in modest or moderate circumstances. The progress we have made has called for self-sacrifice on the part of many. Thanks to the grace of the Supreme Father, we have been able to find and spend many lakhs of rupees so far. The colony's future is assured, for its income will grow as our fraternity expands. Therefore, we shall never be out of funds. How many members have you? Our membership is over 110,000, but of course only a few thousand have settled here. The Radha Soami fraternity is nearly 70 years old, but its greatest growth has been made during the last 20 years. And this progress has occurred, mind you, without any public propaganda because we are a semi-secret organization. If we cared to come out into the public eye and propagate our teachings openly, we could increase our membership tenfold. Our members are spread all over India already, but they look to Dialbag as their headquarters and visit us as often as they can. They are organized into local groups which meet every Sunday at precisely the same hour when we hold a special meeting at Dialbag. Sahabji pauses to wipe his spectacles. Just consider, when we began building this colony, we possessed no more than 5,000 rupees, which had been presented for the purpose. Our first plot of ground was no larger than 4 acres. Now, Dialbag covers thousands of acres. Does it not seem that we are indeed growing? How large do you intend to make Dialbag? I expect to settle about 10 to 12,000 people here, and then we shall stop. A town of 12,000 people, if it is properly laid out, is large enough. I do not want to copy the monstrous towns of your Western countries. They're overcrowded, and therefore breed many undesirable qualities. I want to build a garden city where people can work and live happily, where they can have plenty of space and air. It will take a few years more to finish Dialbag's growth, and then it will be a model community. Incidentally, when I first read Plato's Republic, I was pleasantly surprised to find in that book many of the ideas I am trying to express here. When Dialbag is complete, I want it to act as a prototype of the creation of similar communities all over India, or at least one in each province. I shall offer it as my solution of many problems. You want India to turn her energies into industrial development? Most certainly, that is her crying need. But I would not like to see India lose herself completely in it, as you in the West have done. He laughs back. Yes, India must build up its industrial civilization to rid herself of the poverty which grinds the masses, but she must build it up on a system which will avoid the fight between capital and labor that would otherwise accompany it. How do you propose to do that? By aiming at personal well-being through general well-being and not at the expense of the community. We work on a cooperative principle, and everyone sets the success of Dialbag as being higher than personal success. There are pioneers working here for salaries much lower than those they could obtain elsewhere. I refer to trained and educated men, not to illiterate laborers, of course, who do this voluntarily and gladly. This principle works well here only because we are inspired by a spiritual purpose, which is also the motive power behind all our other efforts. Some men who are in a position to do so are even giving their services freely. This will show you what a fine spirit and enthusiasm our people have. But when Dayal is fully developed and completely self-supporting, I hope such sacrifices will be unnecessary. Anyway, it is the ideal of making spiritual progress more quickly which has brought these people here, for that is the fundamental aim of our fraternity. If you were to come here and join our colony, you might be worth 1,000 rupees a month, but you might have to take only 1/3 of that amount because we cannot afford to pay high salaries. Then gradually you might build a house, acquire a wife, and beget children. But if in this process you begin to think only of the material side of your career, and to lose sight of the spiritual ideal for which you really joined us, then to that extent you begin to fail. Despite all these material activities you see here, we try never to lose sight of the central purpose for which our fraternity was founded. I see. Now, we are not socialist in your Western sense, but it is a fact that the industries, the farms, and colleges are owned by the community. Moreover, this ownership extends to land and houses. You may build a house here, but it is yours only whilst you tenant it. Beyond these limits, everyone is perfectly free to possess and accumulate whatever money and property he has and wherever he has it. This, of course, completely divides us from the tyrannies of socialism. All our communal properties and all the money offerings voluntarily made by members are regarded as trusts to be administered in a religious spirit. Everything is subordinated to our spiritual ideal. This administration is supervised by a body of 45 members, representative of the various provinces in India, which meets twice a year to scrutinize accounts and consider budgets. The ordinary work and general control is in the hands of an executive committee of 11 members. You said before that you would offer Dayal as a solution of many problems. I do not see how you can offer it as a solution of the economic problem, which is perhaps the chief one today. Sahabji Maharaj smiles confidently. Even India may have something useful to contribute on that point, he rejoins. Let me tell you about a plan which we have lately put into operation in order to quicken our rate of growth during the next few years. This plan, to my mind, embodies economic and social principles of radical importance. We have established an inheritance fund which invites offerings from those of our members who are able to subscribe 1,000 rupees upwards. Every such subscriber then receives an annuity of not less than 5% from our administrative committee. At his death, the same annuity will be paid to his wife, child, or whoever else he has previously named. The second person has the same right to name his or her successor to the annuity. But with the death of the third generation, all payment ceases. Should the original subscriber find himself in difficult circumstances or urgent need, then part or even all of his sum may be repaid him. Thus, lakhs of rupees will, in course of time, pour into the coffers of our community through the inheritance fund. Yet the purses of our members will not be laid under heavy toll. Whatever contribution they make, they will be sure of a moderate income in return. I take it that you are trying to find a clear place between the evils of capitalism and the fancies of socialism. Anyway, I'm sure that you will deserve every bit of your success, and I hope it comes quickly. It becomes clear to me that Dayal possesses assured resources for a successful future in the ever-growing inheritance fund, in the constant stream of voluntary donations, and in those industries which have reached a profit-making stage. Several well-known leaders in India are watching our experiment and waiting to see its results, says the white-turbaned head of the Radha Swamis. Some have visited Dayal and even critics who oppose our ideas have come here. You see, the Indian people are among the weakest and poorest in the world, and its leaders offer conflicting panaceas. Gandhi came here once and engaged me in a long conversation. He wanted me to join his political campaign, but I refused. We have nothing to do with politics here. We believe in concentrating on the practical means of regeneration. Although I do not concern myself with Gandhi's political plans, I scout his economic ideas as being visionary and unpractical. He wants India to throw all machinery into the sea. Sahibji shakes his head. India cannot go back to the past. She must go forward and develop the best points of a material civilization if she is to become more prosperous. My countrymen had better take a lesson from America and Japan. The hand spinner and the hand weaver can no longer stand the onslaught of modern rationalized methods. And as Sahabji Maharaj expounds his ideas, I catch the picture of an alert American mind, encased in a brown Hindu body, so efficient and businesslike is his manner, so precise is the expression of his thoughts. My rational temperament is attracted by his air of common sense, balance, and sanity, qualities not very common in this subcontinent. I realize anew the curious paradox which his character presents. Master of over 100,000 people who practice a mysterious form of yoga, prime organizer of the multifarious and materialistic activities which seethe around me in Darialbagh, taken all in all, I write him down as a brilliant and breathtaking man. Nowhere in India, nowhere in the entire world, may I expect to meet his like again. His voice breaks into my thoughts. You have seen two aspects of our life here in Dayalbagh, but our activities are threefold. Man's own nature is threefold, spirit, mind, and body. Therefore we have the workshops and farms for physical work, the colleges for mental growth, and lastly, there are the group meetings for spiritual activities. Thus we aim at harmonious and all-round growth for each individual. But we place the greatest emphasis on the spiritual side, and every member of our fraternity endeavors to carry out his individual yoga practices regularly wherever he may be. May I join one of your group meetings? With pleasure, we shall welcome you at every gathering. Dayalbagh's activities begin at 6 o'clock in the morning with the first group meeting. Dawn swiftly rubs away the darkness of night. Sweet chirrups mingle with the funeral cries of crows, and all the birds begin their matutinal homage to the sun. I follow my guide to a gigantic canvas structure which is supported by wooden posts. A huge crowd of people presses around the entrance, where each person removes his sandals or shoes and hands them to the waiting attendants. I follow the requirements of custom and then enter the great tented hall. A raised platform stands in the center, and His Holiness Sahabji Maharaj sits there in a chair. Hundreds of his followers squat in circling ranks around him, so that the entire floor is carpeted with human bodies. All eyes are turned upon the Master. All tongues are still in silent reverence. I make my way to a place beneath the platform and then squeeze myself into the narrow space. Soon two men stand up at the rear of the hall and their voices break out into a slow chant. The words are Hindi and the rhythm is extremely agreeable to one's ears. This continues for some 15 minutes, by which time the sacred words have lulled one into a peaceful mood, and then the voices diminish in volume until they die down altogether. I look around. Every person in the vast tent is quiet, motionless, sunk in meditation or prayer. I look at the modest, plainly dressed figure on the platform, from whose lips no single word has yet come. His face is graver than usual. His alert, active manner has disappeared, and a serene contemplation seems to engage his mind. With thoughts cross and crisscross under his white turban, I wonder what responsibility lies upon his shoulders, for all these people regard him as their sacred link with the higher life. The utter silence lasts for another half hour. Not a cough, not even a stir. Have all these contemplative Orientals withdrawn their minds into a world barred to the skeptical Westerner? Who knows? But it is a striking prelude to the forceful activities which will soon make the town hum. We recover our footgear and quietly disperse homewards. During the morning hours, I enter into conversation with many Radha Swamis, both residents and visiting members. Several of them speak good English. There are turbaned men from the northwest, pigtailed Tamils from the south, active little Bengalis from the east, and bearded figures from the central provinces. I am impressed by their air of self-respect and by the shrewd practicality which counterpoises their spiritual aspirations. If their desires soar into the empyrean, their feet still walk firmly on the solid earth. Here, I reflect, is a type of citizen, of whom any town might be proud. I like them instinctively and admire them immensely, for they possess that rare quality, character. A smaller meeting takes place during the afternoon. It is a brief, informal affair intended for the benefit of visiting members. Individual problems are discussed, questions answered, and some matters of general concern are dealt with. Sahabji Maharaj reveals an uncommon resourcefulness in the way he disposes of everything which comes up. He adopts a chatty, witty tone, is never at a loss for an answer to the subtlest query, and delivers quick, confident opinions upon the most varied spiritual and material problems. His entire attitude betokens an unusual and successful reconciliation of complete self-confidence with quiet humility. He shows that he possesses an engaging sense of humor, which crops up again and again in merry remarks. The evening brings another group meeting. Every workshop, store, and farm in the colony has closed its activities for the day, and a vast gathering once more fills the giant tent. Sahabji Maharaj occupies his platform chair again. I watch a file of followers approach his seat and voluntarily place contributions for the funds of the Board of Management at his feet. 2 committee members collect and record all these contributions. The chief event which follows is a lengthy address by the Master. His thousands of followers listen to the well-spoken Hindi with absorbed attention, for he has a good oratorical style. He seems to speak from the heart in a picturesque manner which is pregnant with deep feeling. He is so animated by a fiery vigor and ardent enthusiasm that the inspiring effect upon his hearers becomes almost palpable. Each day the same unvarying program is followed. The evening meeting is the longest, for it lasts nearly 2 hours. It says much for the power of Sahabji Maharaj's mentality that he can keep up this program without difficulty and with his usual dynamic power. No one knows beforehand what the subject of his evening address will be. I question him upon the point, and he replies, "When I sit down in the chair, I am quite unaware of the subject. Even after I have begun, I do not know what my next sentence will be or even how I will finish. I trust myself unreservedly to the Supreme Father. He tells me instantly whatever I need to know. I take my orders from him internally. I am actually in his hands." The words of his first address haunt me for some days. Its theme of surrendering to a master piques my mind, until I broach it eventually to Sahabji. We sit on a carpeted piece of ground in the center of Dayalbagh. It is something like a village green, and develop a friendly discussion. He reiterates his point and adds, "The master is absolutely necessary. There is no such thing as self-reliance in the spiritual sphere." "But did you find one necessary?" I asked boldly. "Without a doubt, I spent 14 years searching for a true master before I found him." 14 years? A fifth of your life? Was it worthwhile? The time spent in search of a true master is never wasted, even if it is 20 years, he replies, quick as a flash. Before I became a believer, I was as skeptical as you are. And then I grew desperate in trying to discover a teacher who could open the way to spiritual illumination. I was young and simply crazy to find the truth. I asked the trees, the grass, and the sky to enlighten me if truth existed. I sobbed my heart out like a child, with head bent low, begging for the light. Finally, I could stand the strain no longer. One day I resolved to give up eating and starve to death unless and until the divine power saw fit to grant me some illumination. I could no longer work even. The next night I had a vivid dream, wherein a master appeared to me and revealed himself as such. I asked for his address. His answer was, "Allahabad. You will know my full address later." The next day I spoke to a friend who belonged to that town and told him of my dream. He went away and returned with a group photograph and asked me if I could identify the master's face in the group. I at once pointed to it. My friend then explained that he belonged to a semi-secret society in Allahabad and that the figure I indicated was the master. I quickly got into touch with him and became a disciple. How interesting. Even if you take up yoga exercises alone and depend on your own powers, the day your true prayer is heard will be the day you will be led to meet a master. There is no escape. You must have a guide. A sincere, fully determined seeker will eventually be brought to his real master. How is one to recognize him? I murmur questioningly. Sahabji's face relaxes and an amused expression flickers across his eyes for a moment. The master knows beforehand who is to come to him, and he will draw them magnetically to him. His power meets their destiny, and the result is inescapable. A little company of variegated figures has gathered around us and is rapidly increasing. Soon Sahabji Maharaj will have not one here, but 2 or 3 score. I have been trying to form a clear understanding of your Radha Swami doctrines, I tell him, but they are hard nuts. One of your disciples has loaned me some of the writings on the subject by an earlier master of your fraternity, His Holiness Brahm Shankar Misra, with the result that my brain is working overtime. Sahabji laughs. If you want to understand the truths of Radha Swami teachings, you must perform our yoga practices. We regard the daily performance of these practices as being far more important than theoretical understanding of our doctrines. I am sorry that I cannot explain the detailed methods of meditation we employ, because they are only imparted under a vow of secrecy to those who apply to join us and are accepted. But the basis of them is sound yoga, or listening for the internal sound, as we usually call it. The writings I am studying say that sound is the force which called the universe into being. From a material standpoint, you understand it correctly, but rather it is that a current of sound was the first activity of the Supreme Being at the beginning of creation. The universe is not the result of blind forces. Now this divine sound is known to our fraternity and can be phonetically transcribed. It is our belief that sounds bear the impress of their source, of the power which created them. Therefore, when one of our members listens internally and expectantly for the divine sound, with controlled body, mind, and will, he will become lifted up towards the bliss and wisdom of the Supreme Being as soon as he hears the divine sound. Is it not possible that the sound of the blood beating through one's arteries is the divine sound? What other sound can one hear internally? We do not mean any material sound, but a spiritual sound. The force which appears as sound on our material plane is only a reflection of that subtler force whose workings evolved the universe. Just as your scientists have reduced matter to electricity, so we may trace the force which we hear on the material plane as sound to a higher vibration which escapes our physical ears because it exists on the spiritual plane. A sound carries the influence of the region whence it emanates, and so if you concentrate your attention inwardly in a certain way, you may one day hear the mystic words which sounded forth at the first upheaval in the primeval chaos, and which form the true name of the Creator. The echoes of those words reverberate back into man's spiritual nature. To catch those echoes by means of our secret yoga practice and to trace them up to their origin is literally to be carried up to paradise. The man who faithfully carries out our Radha Swami practices, which are intended to enable him to hear the mystic sound, will forget himself in utter ecstasy when at last it impinges itself upon his inner ear. Your teachings are startlingly novel. To the West, but not to India, Kabir taught the sound yoga in Benares as far back as the 15th century. One hardly knows what to say about them. Why the difficulty? You will readily admit that one form of sound, music, can throw a man into emotional ecstasy. Then how much more would the heavenly internal music affect him? Agreed. If one could prove that the internal music really does exist. Sahabji shrugs his shoulders. I might present you with several arguments to convince your reason, but I fancy you're looking for something more than that. How can I prove the existence of superphysical states by mere reasoning? It is natural for the unprepared brain to perceive nothing beyond this physical world. If you want the best proof, first-hand experience of these spiritual truths, then you must persistently follow up a course of yoga practice. I assure you that the human body is really capable of higher functions than those we commonly know, that the innermost parts of our brain centers are associated with subtle worlds of being, that after proper training, these centers can be energized until we become aware of these subtler worlds, and that the most important center of all enables us to obtain divine consciousness of the highest order. Are you referring to the brain centers known to anatomists? Partly. They are merely the physical organs through which the subtler centers work. The real activity takes place in the latter. The most important of these centers is the pineal gland, which, as you know, is situated in the region between the eyebrows. It is the seat of the spiritual entity in man. Shoot a man through that spot and death is certain and instantaneous. The spirit currents which flow through the auditory, optic, olfactory, and other nerves converge in that gland. Our medical men are still puzzled about the chief functions of the pineal gland, I comment. And well they might be, considering that it is the focus of the individual spirit entity which gives life and vitality to man's mind and body. It is when the spirit entity recedes from the pineal gland that the conditions of dream, deep sleep, or trance supervene, and when it finally leaves the gland, the body falls dead. Since the human body is an epitome of the entire universe, inasmuch as all the elements employed in the evolution of creation are represented in it on a miniature scale, and since it contains links with all the subtler spheres, it is quite possible for the spirit entity in us to reach the highest spiritual world. When it leaves the pineal gland and passes upwards, its passage through the gray matter of the brain brings it into contact with the region of universal mind, and its passage through the white matter exalts its consciousness to lofty spiritual realities. But to attain this spiritual consciousness, all the activities of the bodily senses have to be brought to a standstill. Otherwise, it is not possible to shut off external stimuli. Therefore, the essence of our yoga practices is a complete concentration which turns the current of attention inwards, away from one's environment, until a profound degree of internal contemplation is attained. I look away, trying to digest this suavely spoken flow of subtle recondite ideas. A goodly-sized gathering around us is taking a keen interest in the talk. The tranquil assurance which underlies their master's words attracts me. But you say that the only way to verify these statements is to practice your sound yoga exercises. But you keep those exercises secret, I complain. Whoever applies for admission to our fraternity and is accepted will have our methods of spiritual practice communicated verbally to him. Can you not give me some personal experience first, some convincing proof at first hand? What you say may be perfectly true. Indeed, my heart wants to believe it. You must join us first. I am sorry, that I cannot do. I am built in such a way that it is difficult to give belief before proof. Sahabji spreads out his hands in a helpless gesture. What can I do then? I am in the hands of the Supreme Father. Day after day I attend all the group meetings as regularly as the members of the society themselves. I meditate silently in their midst and listen to their masters' addresses. I question them freely and study such portions of the Radhaswami teachings concerning the universe and man as are made available to me. Late one afternoon, I wander with the disciple about a mile or so away from Dayalbagh to where the jungle begins. Then we turn our feet towards the Yamuna and eventually sit down on the banks of that wide river. From the steep and sandy height, we watch the slow-moving water wind its placid way through the plain which stretches to Agra. Now and then a great vulture flaps its way over our heads towards its home. The Yamuna. Somewhere along these banks Krishna moved victoriously among the milkmaids, charming them with his wondrous lute and his love-making. Today he is probably one of the most worshipped gods in the Hindu pantheon. Up until recent years, murmurs my companion, this place was the abode of wild animals at night, and they roamed over the very side on which Dayalbagh has been built, and now they avoid this place. We sit silently for a couple of minutes, and then he says, You're the first European to sit in our group meetings, though you will certainly not be the last. We appreciate the understanding and sympathy you have shown. Why don't you join our society? Because I have no faith in faith, because I realize that it is fairly easy to believe in what you want to believe. He draws his knees up and rests his chin upon them. The contact that you are having with our Master will benefit you in any case. I shall not press you to join. We do not attempt to make converts, and our members are not allowed to preach. How did you learn of the existence of the society? Very simply. My father had been a member for many years. He does not live at Dayalbagh, but visits it from time to time. He brought me with him on some of his visits, but never on any occasion did he attempt to induce me to join. About 2 years ago, I began to puzzle over things and went about questioning various friends as to their beliefs. I questioned my father, too, and what he told me drew me to Radha Swami teachings. I was accepted as a member of the fraternity, and time has confirmed my faith. I was fortunate, perhaps, because others have come to us only after a lifetime spent in perplexity. If I could settle my doubts as easily and as quickly as you settled yours, I respond vacantly. Once again, we both revert to silence. The dark blue Yamuna water draws my gaze, and I slip insensibly into a profound reverie. All the conscious and unconscious thinking of these Indians is colored by faith, by the necessity of owning allegiance to some sort of religion, creed, or sacred script. Every kind of faith, from the most degraded to the most dignified, is represented in India. Once I stumbled across a little temple on the Ganges. Its pillars were covered with carved reliefs depicting men and women engaged in sexual embrace, and its walls were frescoed with erotic scenes which might horrify a Western clergyman. There is room for this kind of thing in Indian religion, and it may well be that the religious recognition of sex is a better thing than its relegation to the gutter. But then, there is also room for faiths embodying the loftiest and purest conceptions possible to man, such as India. But nowhere in this land have I come across such an amazing cult as the Radha Swamis. It is undeniably unique. What brain other than Sahabji Maharaj's could have conceived this paradoxical combination of yoga, the oldest learning in the world, with the high-pressure, mechanized civilization of an up-to-date European or American city? Is Dayalbagh likely to loom forth in Indian history out of all proportion to its present apparent unimportance? If India is a crossword puzzle, to which no one seems to have yet found the correct solution, that is not to say that the coming years shall not provide an answer. Sahabji had laughed at Gandhi's preaching of medievalism, and the town of Ahmedabad, where Gandhi's own headquarters lie, still echoes back this laughter. From the Sabarmati River one can count 100 tall factory chimneys, which smoke defiance at the little cluster of white wooden bungalows where the gospel of peasant handicrafts finds its inspiration. The forceful impact of Western ways has begun to disintegrate Indians' traditional methods of carrying on the necessary business of living. The first Europeans who appeared off the seacoast of India brought not only bales of goods but also ideas. When Vasco da Gama landed his rough-bearded sailors in the quiet harbor of Calcutta, there began that process of westernization which is moving at such a quick rate today. The industrialization of India has begun in a tentative and timid fashion, but it has begun. Europe has faced in turn the renaissance of intellect, the religious reformation and industrial revolution, and she has left these things behind. India has awakened and finds them lying in her stride. These are now her problems. Will she blindly imitate the Europeans, or will she work out her own and perhaps better way of solving them? Will Sahabji Maharaj's unique contribution focus her attention one day? If I am certain of anything, I am certain of this. India will be thrown into a melting pot of unparalleled character before long. Thousands of years of a society, tied up in worn-out traditions, imprisoned in hidebound religious conventions, will vanish within 2 or 3 decades at most. It will seem a miracle, but it will happen. Sahabji Maharaj has evidently grasped this situation clearly enough. He realizes that we live in a new epoch. The old order of things is being destroyed everywhere, and in India as in other countries. Are Asiatic lethargy and Western practicality to remain twin incompatibilities? He thinks not. Why should not the yogi put on a worldling's clothing? And so he gives forth the fiat that the yogi must come out of his habitual seclusion and mingle with the noisy assemblages where men command machines. He thinks it is time for the yogi to descend into the factory, the office, and the school, and attempt to spiritualize them, not by preaching and propaganda, but by inspired action. The way of hustling everyday activity can and must be made the way of heaven. A spiritually based way of living like yoga, which stands too aloof from workaday men, may come to be regarded by them as a deceptive form of self-important stupidity. If yoga is to remain the hobby of a few hermits, the modern world will have no use for it, and the last traces of the dying science will disappear from existence. If it is to serve only as the delectation of some lean anchorites, we who push pens or plows, move amid the grease and grime of engine rooms who have to endure the hubbub of stock exchanges and the busy barter of shops, we shall roughly turn our heads away. And the attitude of the modern West will shortly be the attitude of modern India. Sahabji Maharaj has shrewdly foreseen the inevitable trend of things and has made a striking effort to save the ancient science of yoga for modern use. This inspiring and strenuous man will certainly leave his mark upon his native land. He has realized that his country has lain in lethargy long enough. He sees clearly why the West, throbbing with manufacture and trade, and its agriculture modernized, lives a wealthier life. He sees also that the culture of yoga remains one of the valuable inheritances which India has received from her ancient sages, but that the few masters who keep this culture alive in lonely places are a fading remnant of their class. When they die, the real secrets of yoga will die with them. And so he has come down from the rarefied air of those peaks of thought to our own times, to the energetic strivings of the 20th century, and is endeavoring to relate the two. Is his effort too fantastic? On the contrary, it is highly admirable. We live in days when Muhammad's tomb in Arabia is illumined by electric light, when the camel is being pushed off the desert sands of Morocco by luxuriously fitted motor cars. What then of India? This vast country startled from the sleep of many hundred years by the impact of a completely opposite culture, must go on opening its heavy-lidded eyes. The English have done more than turn sandy deserts into fertile fields, than build canals and dams to assist agriculture and regulate the floods of great rivers, than fling an impenetrable barrier of highly efficient soldiers across the northwest frontier to keep peace and property secure, than bring in a healthy breeze of sane, rational ideas. Out of the great north and distant west came the white men. Fate placed India at their feet, and the country became theirs with but a few efforts. Why? Perhaps the world, incubating over Asiatic wisdom and Western science, will one day hatch out a civilization that will shame antiquity, deride modernity, and amaze posterity. The trail of my meditation comes to an end, and I raise my head and address a questioning word to my companion. I do not think he hears me. He continues to stare across the river, which reflects the last red light of sunset. It is the twilight hour. I watch the great orb make its rapid disappearance from the sky. The stillness is indescribable. All nature, dumb at the lovely sight, seems to have come to momentary rest. My heart drinks in the superb peace. Once more a glance at the other man. His figure is now wrapped in the shroud of fast-gathering dusk. So we sit in the dead silence for a few more minutes until the sun slips suddenly into black night. My companion rises and quietly leads me through the shadows back to Dayal Bagh. Our walk terminates under a canopy of thousands of starry points of light. Sahabji Maharaj decides to leave Dayal Bagh and go down to a place in the central provinces for a well-earned rest. I take the event as our destined time of farewell and plan a move in the same direction. We shall travel together as far as Timarni, and then our ways will diverge. About 1 hour after midnight, we descend on Agra station. A score of close disciples accompany their master, and so the size of our party is quite noticeable. Someone procures a chair for Sahabji. and while he sits in the midst of his devoted followers, I pace the half-lit platform. During the day, I've reviewed my stay at Dayal Bagh and realized with regret that no memorable inner experience has occurred. No soul-upheaving vision of life's secret meaning has been vouchsafed to me. I had hoped that some illuminating yogic expansion of consciousness might pierce my mental gloom for an hour or two, so that I could then follow up the track of yoga with sight and not with faith. But no, the benediction is not for me. Perhaps I am not worthy of it. Maybe I demand far too much. I do not know. From time to time, I glance at the seated figure. Sahabji Maharaj possesses a magnetic personality which fascinates me. He is a curious mixture of American alertness and practicality, British predilection for correct conduct, and Indian devoutness and contemplativeness. He is a type which is rare in the modern world. Over 100,000 men and women have entrusted the guidance of their inner lives to this man. Yet he sits there, in quiet modesty and humility, this unassuming master of the Radha Swamis. At last our train roars into the station, and a giant headlight throws an uncanny illumination upon the scene through which the rails pass. Sahabji enters his reserved compartment, and the rest of us sort ourselves into other carriages. I stretch myself out for a few hours' sleep, and know nothing more until I awake in the morning with an incredibly dry throat. At every halt which the train makes during the next few hours, followers of Sahabji, who live in the vicinity or even many miles away, crowd around his compartment window. They have been notified of his journey in advance and eagerly seize the opportunity of obtaining this brief contact. For it is said in India that even a minute's contact with the Master will produce important spiritual and material results. I seek and obtain Sahabji's permission to spend my last 3 hours with him in his own compartment. We fall into a long talk about world conditions, about the nations of the West, about India's future, and about the future of his own cult. At the end he tells me in his pleasant, suave manner, "Let me assure you that I have no consciousness of India being my own country. I am cosmopolitan in outlook and look on all men as my brothers." Such amazing frankness delights me. It is so with all his conversations. He always goes straight to the point. He shoots every sentence at a definite target, and he has the full courage of his convictions. To converse with him, to commune with his mind, is a welcome experience. Always he comes out with some unexpected phrase, some new viewpoint on things. The train now moves across country at an angle which brings an intolerable sun through the window and into my eyes. The torrid heat bakes one's flesh. The merciless rays weary one's mind. I pull up the wooden sunblind, that peculiar structure which is so curiously like a Venetian blind, and switch on the electric fan, thus gaining a slight relief from the midday heat. Sahabji Maharaj notices my discomfort and draws some oranges out of a traveling bag. He puts them on the small table and asks me to share them with him. "They will cool your throat," he observes. As his knife slowly parts the colored peel, he remarks musingly, "You are right in being so careful about taking anyone as your master. Skepticism is a useful attitude before you decide on him, but afterwards you must have full faith. Don't rest until you find your spiritual preceptor. He is absolutely essential." Before long there is a grinding sound and someone noisily shouts, "Timarni!" Sahabji Maharaj rises to depart. Something awakens in me before his disciples come and capture him. It breaks my reserve, ignores my Western pride, crushes my anti-religious temperament, and speaks to my lips. "Your Holiness, may I have your blessing?" He turns with a friendly smile, beams pleasantly through his glasses, and cordially pats my shoulder. "You have that already," he assures me in farewell. I return to my compartment, and the train moves rapidly away. Dun-colored fields flash by the window. Little groups of drowsy-eyed cattle munch contentedly on the sparse herbage. My eyes register them only half-consciously, for my mind is carrying away a picture of a notable man, whom I greatly like and profoundly admire, for he is at once an inspired dreamer, a serenely minded yogi, a practical man of the world, and a polished gentleman.